So this is essentially a sequel to a story I did about a month ago. I did a huge deep dive on the TikTok ban bill that was passed by the House of Representatives. You can go check out that video on my channel. And I had erroneously predicted, like, okay, this is all for show. The House of Representatives, they're all up for re-election. They all want to seem tough on China. The Senate is not under the same constraints, and they'll probably kick the can down the road to after the election. I was wrong. I was wrong. But I wasn't wrong for the same, I was wrong, but for different reasons, right? So basically, the U.S. Senate has now, they voted last Tuesday, so about a week ago, to approve a TikTok ban, 79-18. Like I said, this was originally passed by the House of Representatives last month. I'm not going to get all into it again. You could go watch that video if you want more specific kind of, explanation of all this. But essentially, this all comes from a concern over Chinese influence over, what's essentially the entree of the American media diet, or at least the media diet of, Gen Z and even millennials, like for a lot of Americans, particularly younger Americans, because TikTok is owned by ByteDance, or at least partially owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company, and technically under Chinese laws, China, the Chinese Communist Party could request data from ByteDance at any time for any reason, and by law they would have to turn it over. ByteDance denies that they would comply with such a law, but in any case, TikTok has become, for better or for worse, for good reason or not, has really become like a focal point in what is unfortunately seeming to be a developing Cold War between the United States and China. So the reason why I said I was wrong, but for a different reason, is that it's not like this, that the Senate just passed a TikTok ban bill. This ended up becoming a provision of a much larger foreign aid package to Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan, which was passed in the House, and Speaker Mike Johnson, the Republican, incorporated the ban into the foreign aid bill to win Republican support for those efforts, right? So this is now this was the second, ban that the House has passed. And so when this bill, which is primarily a foreign aid package bill, gets sent to the Senate, they're going to vote overwhelmingly for it. And this was a bipartisan supermajority. Again, across the political spectrum, minus some very, progressive people and some very kind of just sorry, not to get political, wackadoodle people all the way on the other end. No one, aside from those two extremes, no one wanted to seem soft on China, right? And this was sent to Biden, President Joe Biden, and he signed it immediately, right? There was no hemming and hawing about it, and he signaled he would sign such a bill immediately. And again, it helped that this was just a provision of a much larger foreign aid package that the Democrats have been trying to get through for months now. In contrast to the original ban that the House passed last month, ByteDance now has 9 months instead of 5 that they originally would have had. They have 9 months to now find a new buyer, and they potentially then have an extra 3-month grace period at the president's discretion. If a deal is in the works but just not completed yet. And notably, even just that 9 months, they didn't kick the can down the road. They didn't kick passing a bill or ban down the road, but they did kick the ban going into effect down the road. So 9 months from now would be, I think they calculated, because it's exactly 270 days or something. This would literally be like the day before the inauguration, right? Of whether it's Joe Biden's re-inauguration or Trump's whoever it is, this would be basically right at that time. So, it's not, whereas the original bill, politicians would have had to worry about angry young voters who a month before the election lost access to TikTok. So it's very politically shrewd. And what else is politically shrewd is the inclusion of this ban as part of this larger foreign aid package. This because if you wanted to vote for everything else, you're probably not going to not vote for it just because of this ban, right? And again, like I said, this is a huge surprise. I thought they would kick it down the road, but the House forced the Senate's hand by putting the ban into this foreign aid bill. And what's been remarked a lot in the media by both this time as well as a couple of weeks ago when the first ban was passed by the House, was the speed at which all of this happened, especially the modern, by modern terms for Congress actually doing shit. This is unprecedented how quickly this all happened. And the New York Times actually did a report that, you know, apparently a ban like this has been in the works for like nearly a year with cooperation from DOJ and the White House, and it was nicknamed internally the Thunder Run, like just trying to kind of light speed this, you know, as quickly as possible. So, like, what's going to happen now? So TikTok is obviously going to file a legal challenge, and they've said as much. TikTok CEO of Shu Zi Chu said, quote, "Rest assured, we aren't going anywhere," end quote. Well, that remains to be seen. TikTok's kind of stance is they view the law as a violation of First Amendment rights. Whose First Amendment rights, though? Are they arguing TikTok's First Amendment rights or the First Amendment rights of the users? So we have a quote here from Michael Beckerman, who's TikTok's head of public policy for the Americas, saying, quote, "This is the beginning, not the end of this long process." He also criticized the TikTok divest or ban measure as, quote, "an unprecedented deal worked out between the Republican Speaker Mike Johnson and President Biden," right? Because, again, this isn't just a ban. It really is, you know, you have 9 months to sell it or divest your interest, right? Which, notably, I believe, and TikTok has made a big point of this, I believe a majority of the stakeholders in TikTok, which is a private company, are non-Chinese. But I guess even ByteDance having a minority stake, I believe it still creates some issues. And it's not just TikTok being this argument. Like the ACLU is also kind of trying to champion, as they are wont to do, right? The championing, you know, the constitutional right to free speech. So we have a quote here from Jenna Leventoff, who's the senior policy counsel at the ACLU, saying, quote, "This is still nothing more than an unconstitutional ban in disguise. Banning a social media platform that hundreds of millions of Americans use to express themselves would have devastating consequences for all of our First Amendment rights and will almost certainly be struck down in court," end quote. And there is some truth to what she's saying there, right? Because there's already precedence, because a federal judge already blocked a Montana bill that would have banned the app in that state, I think last December, so maybe like 4 or 5 months ago. And the New York Times also notes that the legal, you know, even if TikTok doesn't think it has a chance, has any hope in court, the New York Times noted here, and I think this is really interesting, that the legal back and forth could delay the app's ban, right? You know, and they noted that potentially TikTok could just wait this out so that, you know, if by the time a ban would happen, potentially a new president could be in the White House, a different party could be controlling the House and the Senate, so they might be able to maybe have a more sympathetic political system that could maybe reverse this or find some other kind of compromise. And again, there's a lot of really interesting legal questions here, because the Washington Post notes, I did not know about this, but it makes sense when you think about it, but it's really interesting. The Washington Post notes that the Supreme Court ruled in 1965 that American citizens have a constitutional right to foreign propaganda. And that's a big issue here, is that, you know, there seems to be two refrains about what is the danger of China having this access. Is it what China pulls, or is it what China pushes? So, again, like I mentioned before, could China be pulling data from Americans? But then there's the concern of China pushing propagandic content, or at least content that better aligns with their geopolitical interess, right? So there's been a long, you know, there's been some politicians who have basically said the quiet part out loud, being like, people are, you know, all these young people are anti-Israel and protesting for pro-Palestine and all this stuff. They must be getting brainwashed by Chinese propaganda on TikTok. You know, so I don't know about that, but that, at least according to the Washington Post, Supreme Court ruled that we have a constitutional right to foreign propaganda. Now, granted, this has never been reevaluated in like the modern digital age, but technically that is a ruling that should have, that precedence should set the standard in some ways. And also, TikTok does have some grounds here, in that this bill and this ban could be argued that it could be argued that this is a bill of attainder. And what that means is it's a bill that's designed to punish a specific group of individuals. So, like, you can't make a bill that's like, John Smith can't do this. Like, you can't do that, at least from my understanding, right? So, you know, it doesn't mention TikTok by name in the bill, but I think there was like a leaked draft of like a version of this bill, and it was literally titled like TikTok.xml or something, right? So it's very clear why this is happening. So that could be the argument. So let's say all the legal challenges fail and a ban happens. What happens next? There would be an economic impact potentially. TikTok claims that it contributed $24 billion with a B dollars to the U.S. economy in 2023, and most speculate that ByteDance is unlikely to sell its stake in TikTok. Right, so the app would just become banned in the United States. It would be pulled off of app stores, and internet providers that allowed you to access it would get fined or what have you. Variety notes that Chinese officials would quote, firmly oppose, end quote, a forced sale. And supposedly they've added TikTok's algorithm to their tech export list. It would be an export that would have to receive governmental approval, which it probably would not, right? Axios also notes that like I said before, they could just wait out the election and see if the controlling party in Congress has a change of heart. And not only do people think this isn't going to happen for all the reasons I just outlined, but ByteDance has explicitly denied rumors that it was considering a sale and that they would rather just shut down their U.S. operations. So they're really playing a game of chicken here, and who's going to blink first remains to be seen. Until this happens, you still have full access to the app. Nothing's going to change. The quality of the content might change just because people start moving off of the app, like in anticipation of a potential ban. But nothing about your access to the app is going to change until no earlier than January, but probably later. And creators, my kind of take on it is that creators on TikTok, I think they're going to be outraged at first, but most of them will just, eventually them being outraged isn't going to do anything. So they're going to move over to YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels if they haven't already. Because again, most people are on all these platforms already. But there's still an issue because of the strength of the algorithm, and that would be lost, right? That's TikTok's secret sauce, and that's something, like I said, that would not be something that, even if ByteDance were to sell TikTok, they really would just be selling the brand, the infrastructure, and the user base, not the algorithm. And really, the algorithm is what makes TikTok, right? Vox spoke with Zari A. Taylor, who's a doctoral candidate at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And Zari A. Taylor said, basically, she explained that the algorithm is good at promoting small users with small followings to help them grow organically. That's the whole thing, is just how the intricacies and nuances of how it promotes content to specific people, right? And the people, even if you move to YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels, which is presentationally the same in terms of vertical video, and you're swiping between an endless stream of content, it wouldn't necessarily have the same growth opportunities because their algorithms are, at least at this time, they're different, or they're just built with different aims, right? They're not as good for growing things organically. YouTube a little bit more, but again, as I'm learning to do with this YouTube channel, there's a lot of work just to grow the audience slowly. So who would buy it, right? I talked about this in my last video about a couple weeks ago. Who would buy this? Again, it's like selling Coke without the recipe, right? Or the secret recipe. So you're getting the Coke brand, but it's not going to taste the same. So at that point, what are you paying for? Daniel Ives, who's a managing director with Wedbush Securities, said that TikTok with the algorithm could be worth up to $100 billion. Without it, closer to maybe 30 or 40. And I think that's an overestimation. I guess they're really, because again, I guess it makes sense because you still get the brand and the user base and people are there. And as we've seen with Twitter has declined drastically since Elon Musk's takeover, but people are still using it, right? And it's not just a ghost town. It's nothing like it was maybe 2-3 years ago, but it's not a ghost town either. So who has enough money? Who has the cash to do this? So probably couldn't be Google or Meta for antitrust reasons, right? Because Google has YouTube Shorts and Meta has Instagram Reels. So that probably would not withstand, regulatory scrutiny, right? It could be a private equity coalition. I know there was talks of Steve Mnuchin, who was the Trump's Treasury Secretary, maybe trying to build up a group of investors. There under Trump in 2020, when the whole idea of banning TikTok first kind of came to the mainstream conversation, his original idea was to have like Microsoft or Oracle, even like Walmart, invest in it in some ways to at least remove that Chinese stake in the company. But obviously that never went through. But Microsoft could still be a viable option here because, again, they have the cash and they don't have, they don't have some kind of competitor the way Google and Meta do. And I think I read somewhere Microsoft, again, as they're building their AI models, having all access to all that data could be really, really valuable. So where do I stand on this, right? I think I've made my position kind of known here, but ultimately I think people are right when they say this is definitely a security issue, right? I'm not denying that. But the government isn't taking a stance on this because they're altruistic or for good intentions, right? They only care because China is an economic and geopolitical adversary, right? We have a quote here from Senator Mark Warner, who's a Democrat from Virginia, who's the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, saying, quote, "We hope that TikTok will continue under new ownership, American or otherwise. It could be bought by a group from Britain, Canada, Brazil, France. It just needs to no longer be controlled by an adversary that is defined as an adversary in U.S. law," end quote. And again, it's like, okay, this is a concern potentially. Because, again, I'm very left-leaning, but I'm also no fan of the Chinese Communist Party for, like, its authoritarian measures. So, if all I know is that if we had this opportunity, like, if there was some really popular app in China that we had a stake in and we could get access, of course the intelligence community would be using it. Of course they would. So I wouldn't put it past China to do any of this, right? But it's like we should figure out our own shit first. It's like, okay, we're so concerned about Chinese data invasions, but we have no problem with American social media companies, or better yet, the U.S. government and their surveillance of American citizens without warrant or due process. And again, it's only now that we're slowly starting as a society, maybe not society, but like the political class is starting to actually make moves in regards to American social media companies, like with Facebook. We have a quote here from Senator Ed Markey, the Democrat from Massachusetts, a very progressive Democrat, saying, quote, "Instead of suppressing speech on a single application, we could be addressing the root of the mental health crisis by targeting big tech's pernicious privacy invasion business model of teenagers and children in our country," end quote. And I completely agree. And again, it just seems like very politically motivated under this guise of like security and protecting Americans and their data and all this stuff. And again, like I mentioned before, I think a big part of this is that TikTok, more so than the other apps, are potentially more politically threatening to the political establishment. Again, with younger people being on it and being influenced, whether organically or maliciously being influenced in directions that the political establishment doesn't necessarily like. But again, I think it's a security issue, but I don't think TikTok can make an argument that this is an issue of free speech, since it's a law against the business structure of a platform, not the speech happening on that platform, right? So you can still say whatever you want, you just can't do it here. This product cannot exist the way it currently exists, right? Ultimately, like at the end of the day, I feel like I'm circling the drain here, so I'll just wrap this up. That this could be the end of TikTok if they're playing chicken and no one blinks. It'll get banned, and even if it didn't get banned and it was sold, again, it wouldn't retain the algorithm, and at that point, would it even still be TikTok? Because Chinese engineers work on that. And it just. All of this, though, it's like, who knows? There's really been little to no evidence that China is doing this, though, despite what I said before, that I think they'd be stupid not to if they had the opportunity to do this. And this kind of just all feels like we're living through the McCarthy era again, right? Where this period in the 50s when Joe McCarthy is like, I have a list of 200 names of communists in the State Department, whatever. And it turned out most, if not all of those, was baloney. I think he was just holding up like a piece of paper. Like there was never any list of names, but people were freaked out about it. And I think we're going to look back at this period and kind of laugh at how paranoid everyone was about China invading, and abusing American data and all this stuff. I mean, I could be wrong, and this video will be public, and people will be able to come back to this and laugh at how wrong I was. But I think in like 30, 50 years, we're going to look back and kind of laugh at how paranoid we were during all of this, kind of like how we were in the last Cold War. And it sucks that I have to say the last Cold War. There should only be one. Well, there should have been zero, but there should only now be one. And I really hope that this isn't going to keep keep escalating into really scary territory.